And joining us now, Alison Loat, Executive Director with Samara, and we welcome you back to TVO.
Thank you for having me.
I asked you this the last time you were here. We're going to start again because I don't think everybody knows. What's a Samara?
The Samara is the little helicopter seed that comes from a maple tree down in the fall.
And that's why you named the organization after that thing.
Yeah, because it's a Canadian image, and
it's a very Canadian
from
thing.
Little things, big things grow.
And the organization itself does what?
We are a charitable organization that is trying to strengthen the attention that Canadians pay to the health of their democracy. And we do that with programs that touch on three areas: political leadership, journalism, and the participations of citizens in public life.
And we're talking about politicians today. This is the second report you've done. Yes. You were here last time on your first report. What's this one all about, this second report?
This report is called Welcome to Parliament, A Job with No Description, and it is the second in a series of reports that we're producing that share the stories of the 65 MPs that we spoke to after they left Parliament. So it's the first time in the history of the country that members of Parliament have been systematically interviewed about their jobs, why they went into them, what they did while they were there, and what advice they'd have on how to improve our politics.
So let's find out. They get elected, they show up to Ottawa, day one on the job. Describe arriving in Ottawa. What did they tell you?
Yeah, well, they said a number of things, but one of the biggest things they said, there are two things that really struck them on the first day. The first is a very positive feeling of awe about the Parliament, about the institution of Parliament and the function and the history that they're a part of. And then the second corresponding feeling is, frankly, the, oh my goodness, what am I doing? They admitted feeling extremely unprepared for this job, acknowledged really not being sure how Ottawa worked and how they should go about the job, which surprised us. Not because of course it is an overwhelming and important job, so we weren't surprised they felt that way, but the intensity with which they described those emotions, 10 or 15 years after they first entered public life, was the surprise.
It is odd because, in order to get there, you got to decide to run, so presumably you know why you want to run. You got to win a nomination. You then have to win an election. I mean, you can't make a decision on a Monday and end up there on a Friday. And despite all of that, they seemed ill-prepared for what Ottawa had in store for them.
Yeah, I think there's a few reasons. One of the things we found in our first report, which we called the accidental citizen, is how many of them say that they had never planned to go to politics before. There's a bit of salt we could pour on that. Well, of course, you're just trying to pretend you never wanted to be a politician. Right. But for many of them, it really was in fact the case. The average age at which people enter politics in Canada and federally is their late 40s usually. So they have spent 25 or 30 years doing something completely different, usually in a town or city far from Ottawa. So in that sense, it isn't always a surprise that they're not prepared. Furthermore, there's a lot of unpredictability. You're not sure if you're going to win your nomination, if your party's going to choose you, and then even if you are chosen, are you actually going to win the general election? So I think a lot of attention gets focused on that political election element of it, and less of thinking through, how am I going to approach this job once I get there?
So they show up and they're completely disoriented by what's in front of them. How do they actually get through those first few days and weeks?
Well, this was another surprise from the report, is how almost all of them said there was next to no training or orientation that was provided to them when they arrived in Ottawa. So we thought it was just strange when you compare to, if you think about it as a job, which it is, most of us when we begin a new job, there's some aspect of, here's the washrooms, but also here's what the job is, here's what its major components entail, and here's some tips and advice on how to do it well. In Parliament, there is none of that, or very few of them were called any kind of orientation.
You've got to be kidding. They get none of that kind of stuff?
It surprised us too. That's what they said. At least that's how they recalled it.
Do they recall that the lack of training or orientation affected their ability to do their jobs well?
They acknowledged at the end that they say, looking back, it would have been nice to have something, but, I managed to survive and I came out of it okay. So, I think politicians often by their very nature tend to be quite upbeat. And obviously they're reflecting back, so they're like, it's all said and done now. But many of them said, it would have been nice to have something. Often there's an afternoon where they're fed a bunch of information, but they all say, it would have been wonderful to have some kind of an orientation or executive education like many other, senior leaders have in other organizations.
Who should do it?
We posit at the end that it's, this is a worthwhile discussion because it doesn't feel impossible. And so probably it's a combination of the House of Commons and the Parliament and the permanent staff that are there in collaboration with the political parties, with the recognition that effective orientation is really what we need to have good government and really good organizations anywhere.
Alison, let's focus for a bit here on what the job's all about. Because again, you get elected to a job, you assume you know what it's about. And here's the quote from your piece. When we asked participants to describe the role of an MP and how they thought about the job, they were nearly as many responses as there were MPs. Stated most simply, there was little agreement among MPs about what they were in Ottawa to do in the first place. Now this is, I guess, completely contrary to conventional wisdom, which is that these people from the age of 4 think about how they're going to get elected and they're ready to hit the ground running and all that kind of stuff. So what were they telling you? What were some of the different ways that MPs described what they thought their role was going to be when they got there?
This surprised us too. We were quite innocently asking, what's the job of an MP as sort of a warm-up question, and we're really struck by it. In the report, we talk about 5 different categories that we used, and there was huge variation between them and often direct conflict in the way that they talked about the job. So some of them thought about it very philosophically. We called these people philosophers. So they would say either, my job is to represent the views of my constituents, or others who said, my job is to form a complete judgment and my own, best judgment as to what to do about an issue. Other people talked about it as a sort of tension or sometimes a balance between being local in orientation and being national in outlook. Other people inserted the role of the political party. They said, I can tell you a bunch of stuff, but let's be clear here. I'm a member of a political party. I ran on that platform, and so my job is to represent that. Where some of the strongest tension is in people who said, my job is to serve my constituents. If they have a problem, they come to me and I help them. And then people who, on the other hand, say, listen, I'm not an alderman here. My job is not to schmooze in the constituency. It's to spend time in Parliament making laws for the better of the country, and that other stuff is all just a distraction. So those are a few of the ways. Another common way people described it is to compare it to another job. But what struck us is that there was almost no similarity in the jobs that they used to compare it to. So people said, oh, it's like being an ambassador, it's like being a teacher, it's like being a lobbyist, it's like being a spokesperson, and one person even said it was like being a guard dog. So I don't know.
It's actually it's a bit like all those things.
Yeah, that could have been the most true one of all.
Well, I guess, we're a parliamentary democracy here, and traditionally speaking, their role is to consider and pass legislation, to hold government accountable and authorize spending, and to determine the life of the government by providing support or not.
Correct.
Now, that's the textbook definition of what a member of parliament does.
Correct.
How many of them said any of those things to you when you asked them to define the job?
Not one explained it like that. So nobody explained it in a way that would match our traditional understanding of the role of an MP as a political scientist would define it. A number talked about the job of passing laws. That was common and making policy. What I guess struck us the most is only one MP completely articulated that the job was to hold government to account, which I think most people think is the single most important job of a member of parliament. Most political scientists would say that. 2/3 of these folks were in opposition, and only one said that. A few referred to it later, and that really struck us. And it's not to say that they wouldn't recognize that as an important role if they were given a survey, but they didn't reflect and recollect the job that way.
Why do you figure?
I think probably because the demands of the job are often the things that they think about first. So when what did they spend their time doing? I spent my time in my constituency doing events, helping constituents with problems, and I spent my time in committees. And so that's probably why that comes to mind first for a lot of them. But one thing that has just really struck me as we've written up these reports and we look across the 65 and see what they say is, if only we could go back again and ask them, because that would be the question that I would be curious to know.
Well, how do you think this kind of lack of textbook understanding of what the job's all about actually affects the way they do the job?
I think there's a couple of reasons we should be concerned about this. The first is that I think it impacts the ability of an MP to do their job well. This is something we're going to talk about in the next report that we release, but the result of not necessarily being clear on what your role is and why you're supposed to be there, or having, I should say that, they're each clear on their own, but they have conflicting and different views themselves, is that many of them are frankly forced to wing it. They don't get orientation, they don't get support or training, and they're all go-getter types. And so, of course, what do? They just try to make their own path, and that doesn't always mean that it's focused on things that perhaps Canadians as a whole would like. But I guess the more fundamental reason to be concerned is if you think about a workplace where its leadership has no shared view of why they're there and what they're supposed to be doing, a lot of negative things happen. Things like issues don't get looked at properly, people's skills don't get put to use in the best way possible, interpersonal tension emerges, people focus on the short term and not necessarily on the long term. And those are a lot of the features of contemporary politics that, at least anecdotally, I've heard people say, what, I can't be bothered with this, it's a turnoff. And so you sometimes wonder if maybe we did have a little bit more shared view of what a member of parliament is there to do and what we expect of them. Perhaps we might be a small conversation to have about how to improve the culture of our politics.
Older, grizzled veterans would say, Alison, that's going to be there regardless. You can train them, you can orientate them as much as you want. 'Twill ever be thus. Are they right?
Well, there's the Chinese proverb that says, what's the best time to plant a tree 100 years ago, and what's the second best time today? So I think, you're right, an old grizzled veteran would say things can never change, but I prefer to remain optimistic and hope for a better future.
That's a good proverb. I got to remember that one. Haven't heard that before. Okay, in which case, what to do? They don't have a sort of agreed upon shared vision of what the job is all about. So does somebody need to write it up and hand it out to them so they know?
Well, as we reflected on this is the question we actually want to posit back. Our goal at Samara is, as I said at the beginning, to try to encourage people to pay attention to how our democracy works and how we can improve it. And so we think the question of should there be a job description for an MP is a conversation we should be having. It's a way for us all to think about, what do we actually expect of our members of parliament? What do we expect them to be doing? I guess I would argue that at a minimum there should be a clear understanding of the constitutional or the historical view of the MP's job, which you described. It is to form a government and to pass laws, to hold a government to account, and determine the life of a government. That should be well understood, I think. But there's conversations on top of that we could have. Do we expect our MPs to be the ombudsman for constituents in the office, help them with immigration claims, filing paperwork, bureaucracy? Well, exactly.
We do now.
And do we want them to do that, or is that the job of the public service? So I think there's some questions in there that I think are important ones to have. Do we want our members of parliament to do exactly what's in the platform of their political party all the time or not? So those are important questions, and I definitely can't answer them on my own. But I'd hope to, at least at a minimum, those who are watching might want to discuss that.
Sure, but there's theory and there's reality, and the reality is some constituent comes to you and says, I want you to help me get a visa for an uncle who wants to come over here from wherever. And you say, well, that's really for the public service to deal with, not for me. You just lost one vote, at least.
Well, there can be a difference between being able to help that person and direct them to the appropriate place to get the help versus actually doing the work themselves. But then again, maybe that is what we want our members of parliament to do. So, and that's, I can have a view on that, you can have a view on that, but I think this is, citizens are the, in a way, the collective employers of members of parliament, and I think it is our job to think a little bit about what we expect from them. And then if we do have a clear view of what we want them to do, at least we know, if we're not happy with it, why that is and what we might do differently.
Okay. What about, in the United States, after they have elections, they have definite transition periods. It's very formalized, out with the old, in with the new, and it's prescribed, I gather, by law, how long the period of time it is and how it works. We have, I guess, an informal understanding here, but nothing that formal. Do we need to do something more formal?
Yeah, I think introducing some element of training and orientation, it just doesn't feel like the most impossible thing to do in the world. I don't think we have to go as far as having the formal transition period like you see in the US. But this is a lot of, culture change, right? And it's just small habits that, good organizations instill over time. So it won't be as straightforward as, here's the 6-month transition, but there's nothing to say you can't have, 4 or 5 days, or it expected that a Friday morning once a month there's some kind of a seminar or series. There isn't a mentorship program or some kind of advisory program that's set up.
So I would have thought that was a no-brainer. The veteran in caucus helps the rookie, hangs out with him for a couple of weeks and shows him the ropes. That doesn't happen?
A few MPs said it would happen informally. The only party whose members mentioned it in a more systematic way with the Bloc Québécois, where there were enough of them that said that they were formally paired with a mentor, that there probably is, at least at the time that these folks came in, there was some kind of a program, but the other parties members of the other parties didn't refer to anything like that. Some said it was actually quite hard to find a mentor and hard to get advice, and that's why, as I said, they're often forced, to wing it.
We've done 2 programs here. First year we called it the rookies, second year we called it the sophomores. 3 MPPs from Queen's Park, 3 members of the federal parliament. And basically, the learning curve, they told us, was astonishing. First year, they didn't have a clue what was going on. Second year, boy, oh boy, they just felt they learned so much more, and they were able to, figure out the job and help people so much more. It makes you wonder whether or not if we actually kind of gave these folks a break off the top and trained them and oriented them how to do the job, we might get served better. Is that the idea?
Yeah, well, I happen to think the role of an MP is a very important one. Symbolically, it's important. This is the way we represent ourselves to a collective whole as citizens. And practically, it's important. These people pass laws in our, ostensibly in our interest. And I would argue we should do all that we can to try to give them the tools to be effective. There's always going to be a learning curve. I mean, it's a complicated, blood sport, as we all know, or many people know. But that doesn't mean we should not try to insert a little bit more training and support for the people who do it, and perhaps we'd be happier with the outcome in the end.
Gotcha. Alison Loat from Samara, thanks so much for coming into TVO tonight, as always.
Thank you for having me.